Contrary to many of my peers, anime didn't play a huge part in my childhood. Quite the contrary, in fact. While growing up, the shows I watched were mostly American cartoons. Think SpongeBob, Phineas and Ferb and the like. And by the time I discovered anime even existed, I was at the age where I thought I was beyond the animated medium, as I deemed it too childish for my tastes. Little did I know how my fascination with that very medium would shape how I lived my whole life. When I transferred to another high school due to personal reasons back in 2017, I met some people who I, to this day, consider my nearest and dearest. And one of them urged me to get into anime. I was skeptical at first, but while I watched some recommendations of his and even liked some of them, none of them really ignited that flame inside me to say, yes, I want to watch anime now. And even a few years later, nothing had really changed. But then, well, you know the drill. COVID was obviously not a fun period for me. I don't think it really was for anyone. But given the excess amount of free time I had been given, and myself growing increasingly bored of the monotonous lifestyle of home sweet home 24/7, I decided to give anime another shot. A proper one this time. I sat down with a notepad in one hand and my phone in the other. Yes, in the beginning I documented my list of anime I had watched and especially wanted to watch with pen and paper. I went through some of the classics, stuff that everyone and their mother had watched. No, literally, my mother had watched most of these. Attack on Titan, Death Note, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, and I fell in love. The medium was so expressive, the characters so unique, it felt like I had discovered a whole nother world, and with more time than I knew what to do with on my hand, I set on exploring that world for all it was worth. One genre quickly clicked with me faster than any other, isekai. And who can blame me? What 15-year-old didn't dream of being transported to another world, gaining incredible magic powers, saving that world, and conquering many hearts in the process? I watched all the greats. Overlord, Konosuba, Mushoku Tensei, and the time I got reincarnated as slime, you name it. Even to this day, watching a shitty seasonal isekai here and there is one of my biggest guilty pleasures. For a while, I was hesitant to start watching ReZero. For better or for worse, I watched isekai for the power fantasy, escapism, and ReZero was decidedly not that. But when I finally got over that hurdle, what I found was a world as rich as some of the all-time greats, a power system that makes me fantasize about all its possibilities at night, and most importantly, a great story. A story about love, a story about self-improvement and self-acceptance. Because while the show's setting is fantastical, the themes at its very core are very human. This is why ReZero is my favorite anime of all time, and it won't change anytime soon. The concept of time travel is nothing new in the world of anime. Numerous shows have used the concept in some way or another, whether as a central plot device or just as an afterthought. Every genre has its fair share of perpetrators, but fantasy is amongst the ones where I see it used most often. But none use it in quite the same way as ReZero. Protagonist Subaru Natsuki arrives in a new, unfamiliar world with nothing but his clothes, his smartphone, which doesn't have any reception, and a bag with some things he bought at a convenience store. Not exactly the type of equipment one would require to survive in a fantasy world filled with mythical creatures and magic. Normally, when someone gets summoned to another world, it's for a greater purpose, and the person in question is given tools to achieve that very purpose. Whether it be an overpowered type of equipment, overwhelming physical or magical power, or a goddess at your beckoning. But Subaru gets none of that. How in the world is he supposed to survive all that? Well, that's the thing. He doesn't. In fact, the only power he does receive revolves around him dying over and over again. Return by Death is what he calls this ability, and it's definitely a fitting name. When dying, Subaru returns to a specific point in time, a checkpoint where he then gets a chance to change fate for himself and his companions. Now, hearing this, one might already get an idea about how the show is structured. Subaru is faced with obstacle after obstacle, and he uses his several chances at life to figure out the optimal path to get through these sticky situations. And while that is true to a certain extent, that's not the whole story. Because while action, intrigue, mystery, and the overarching plot are big components of ReZero, they aren't the things that truly make it a masterpiece. ReZero, at its core, is a character study, Subaru at its forefront. On the surface, Subaru just looks like every other generic isekai protagonist. A high schooler with brown eyes and brown hair, with the only thing differentiating him being his unusual looking tracksuit. But from his first interaction in this new world, one can see that he's anything but generic. Initially, Subaru appears to be a pretty extroverted person. He can crack jokes in situations in which other people would fall into despair. His demeanor, while attracting some negative attention from people he hasn't met, is generally viewed in a positive light, and he quickly finds people he could even call friends. But all of this is just a facade. Subaru, in his previous life, was a shut-in NEET. Growing up, he always tried to escape from his father's shadow, resorting to more and more extreme stunts to stand out. He believed he would be abandoned if he wasn't the center of attention, and while that did work for a while, his friends, one by one, grew sick of his antics, leaving Subaru all alone. So naturally, being transported into this other world was a blessing in disguise for him. After an initial bit of bewilderment, Subaru was more or less happy with the situation. After all, in this world, nobody knew of his father, Natsuki Kenichi. He wouldn't have to be compared to him all the time and would be free to just be himself. But old habits die hard. His persona was so ingrained into his being that he would uphold it all the time, trying to never let the people close to him know about his troubles. This did work for a while, although cracks were starting to show at times, like when he broke down in Arc 2 during his stay at the mansion. While Subaru is one of the best at putting up a wall and pretending everything is fine, even he can't do it forever. It all came to a head in Arc 3, the return to the capital. Emilia, being one of the 4 royal candidates, was invited to the castle in the capital. Although she knew it wasn't necessarily a good idea to bring along Subaru, she reluctantly agreed to it. However, he had to agree to stay away from the castle and wait for her return. However, that is where that abandonment issue once again reared its ugly head. He couldn't bear waiting for her, and even convinced a good friend of his and maid of Emilia, Rem, to turn a blind eye to him breaking his promise. And naturally, it wouldn't take long for him to cause the trouble Emilia was so afraid of. In the castle, Emilia was being treated rather rudely. She was of half-Evan descent after all, and closely resembled the world's biggest villain, the Witch of Envy. But Subaru was having none of it, and while defending her, he accidentally offended the whole Knight Order, not only embarrassing himself, but also the royal candidate he was affiliated with. But that wasn't all. After that embarrassing moment, he didn't back down or apologize in the slightest. No, he doubled down and accepted the knight's request for a duel, getting brutally beaten down in the process. When asked why he did all those things by Emilia, who was understandably mad, he peeled back the curtain and revealed what was truly on his mind. He was mad at being told he was inferior, mad that he was told he wasn't deserving of Emilia, and mad that the knight, Julius, was trying to push him away from her. And while he claimed it was all for her sake, that wasn't really the case. She begged him to stay at the lodging and not use magic as he was still hurt, but he ignored both of those requests. The longer their conversation went on, the clearer it became. Subaru did the things he did only out of his own selfish desire. The version of Emilia he envisioned in his mind didn't correspond at all with the real version of her. He was still stuck with the belief that he was the hero in a fantasy show, with Emilia being a damsel in distress that he should be saving. But while many would consider this to be one of, if not the weakest episode of the entire show, I wholeheartedly disagree. Was the episode painful to get through? Yes. Did Subaru behave like the biggest douchebag on planet Earth? Absolutely. But I think all of this was necessary for Subaru's character development. He needed a wake-up call to recognize that the way he went about life wasn't healthy in the slightest, and that he needed to make a change. But while the moment at the castle was definitely the hardest part to get through as a viewer, I would argue that Subaru's lowest point was yet to come. Following Emilia's departure from the capital, Subaru figured out 3 things. 1. The checkpoint had been updated, meaning that his actions at the castle and his conversation with Emilia could not be undone. 2. The witch cult has planned an attack on the Roswell mansion, the exact place where Emilia is headed. And 3. The white whale had made its appearance, making it borderline impossible to reach Roswell mansion unscathed without taking a major detour. Several times he tried to get through all of these obstacles unharmed, but he just couldn't manage to do it. He even begged the rest of the royal candidates to help out their camp, abandoning the rest of his bride still remaining, but to no avail. For the past 17 episodes, Subaru has lost his mind, his pride, and most importantly, his life over and over and over again. He was thrown in situations that almost no one else would be able to solve, tried again and again until it somehow worked. Subaru's tenacity and sheer willpower was without a doubt his biggest asset. But everyone has their breaking point. A point where they just can't do it anymore. And this was Subaru's breaking point. He has given up. In his desperation, he asks Rem to run away with him, to abandon everyone, just the two of them. After all, he believes there's nothing left he can do, that he has exhausted all his options, that his pathetic self isn't capable of solving the predicament he's in. But while it is borderline impossible to recover from such a mental state by yourself, Subaru isn't alone. Through all the hardships and pain, Rem stayed by his side. And although Subaru is only able to see the pathetic, sad, and incapable side of himself, he hasn't considered the viewpoint of others. Rem, especially, was saved by Subaru several times, and this time it was her turn to drag him out of the destructive mindset he has put himself in. One of the most emotionally charged speeches I have ever seen, she does exactly that. Even if Subaru himself is blind to the fact that he has helped so many people, Rem does everything in her power to show him exactly that. It's not easy to overcome feelings of inferiority, the feeling that you haven't actually accomplished anything in your life. And it definitely isn't easy to start loving yourself again after years of hating yourself. Recognizing that other people do care about you is the first step in caring about yourself again. But while Rem's speech has certainly caused a shift in his mindset, that doesn't erase Subaru's inferiority complex in the slightest. And while one would think it impossible for him to ever resolve this issue, after all, his father, who is the cause of most of these issues, is still back on Earth, the very next arc would provide that opportunity. Trapped in a sanctuary, someone would have to go through the 3 trials, overcoming their past, their present, and their future to free everyone trapped in there. And while Emilia was the intended candidate, Subaru found himself being able to undergo the trial in her place. And the first trial had him face the entire source of his trauma, his father. Make no mistake, though, Subaru's father isn't a bad person by any stretch of the imagination. Quite the opposite. But that's exactly the problem. His father was too amazing, to the point where Subaru would get compared to him all the time. After discovering that he couldn't just stay the best at all his different hobbies, he started getting in trouble and pulling pranks to stand out and stay the center of attention. He was told he resembled his father, so he kept doing bigger and bigger stunts in hopes that people would still like him. But his understanding of relationships with other people was all wrong. He wasn't becoming their friend as himself, Natsuki Subaru, but as Kenichi Subaru's son. So when he started going to high school, not really knowing how he should behave to form genuine connections with other people, he failed horribly. After that, he tried his best not to stand out from others. School became a chore, and he started attending less and less until it came to the point where he stopped going to school altogether. Secretly, he wished his parents would put him on the right track again. Wished they told him his worries were pointless, that he should stop moping around and go back to school. He wanted his father to say, "I don't love you anymore and you are not my son." What scared him the most was that they still treated him the same way as before. But through his journey in Lugunica, he recognized what had gone wrong. He started making friends and companions on his own merits, without having to rely on his father's reputation. And through there and his parents' love, he finally started figuring out how to appreciate himself a bit more. Granted, he was still not perfect and had a lot of growth ahead of him, but he made a step in the right direction. Fortunately, this whole conversation with his parents didn't actually take place in the real world. The trials aren't actual situations, just simulations in one's head. But that didn't bother Subaru. He managed to grow as a person as a result of the trial and got to say his possibly final words of goodbye to his parents, something he didn't manage to do in his homeworld. Isekai is often used as a sort of power fantasy and wish fulfillment, another world in which your struggles just suddenly don't exist anymore and you can live to your heart's content. While I do love myself some good isekai swap, that's all it is at the end of the day. Popcorn entertainment where you don't have to spend a single thought on a story and character motivation, something you can just enjoy without any trouble. But that also gets boring after some time. Seeing your main character succeed without having to face any actual problems, just cruising from success to success, can be fun, yes, but nothing more. That's why ReZero was and still is such a breath of fresh air. Subaru isn't a perfect person by any stretch of the imagination. He fails again and again. He can be selfish, he can be annoying, he can be stupid. Sometimes he's brave to the point of foolishness, and sometimes he cannot do anything by himself and has to be bailed out by his friends. But you know what? That's fine. No, not only fine, that's amazing. Subaru feels more like a real human being than 95% of other anime protagonists. Subaru isn't perfect. He can and will make mistakes. But when you see him try his best and fail over and over again, it is so cathartic to see him finally succeed. And that's also why his growth as a character isn't only so amazing to watch, it also feels so real. It totally makes sense for him to feel worthless at the beginning of the show. And his actions at the castle, while being very hard to watch, make complete sense considering everything we know about Subaru as a person. So seeing him slowly but surely overcome those anxieties, open up to people, and start caring about himself again is a wonderful thing to be able to see. Subaru's journey is by no means over. In fact, it has barely started, with the story covered in the anime probably not even reaching the halfway point of the story as a whole. Subaru will face many more hardships and setbacks. All those setbacks will make the conclusion all the more interesting. I am looking forward to where the story will take not only us, the viewers, but also my favorite main character, Natsuki Subaru.